Shalom, shalom, I'm Rabbi Yehudah, and today I would like to talk to you about the term Jew. Unfortunately, there has been a myth promulgated amongst African Americans who have an affinity with Judaism or the Torah, and there has been an idea pushed, a false notion that the term Jew actually comes from European people who practice Judaism. In other words, they believe that European Jews came up with the term Jew in the English vernacular, also insinuating that this term Jew is exclusively and should be used for them only. Now, I've over the years, I've heard so many ridiculous things that it just startles me that a lot of people subscribe and accept these things as truth. It's heartbreaking. And the other thing that I don't like about this is that they just give too much credit to Ashkenazi Jews, to European Jews. I mean, from the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Tosefta, I mean, you just name it, the Beretha, all of these things that are ancient texts belongs to Israel have been attributed to the Ashkenazi Jews, the European Jews. And many of these things, the things that I just brought up, existed long before there was any such thing as an Ashkenazi Jew. But the word Jew, for that matter, came afterwards because it's a part of the English vernacular. So let's talk about it a little bit. If anybody is familiar with the English language or have any or even a little knowledge of linguistics, you will find out that English is actually a broken German language. English is a daughter or granddaughter, if you may, of the westernized vernacular or the westernized contribution to languages. The first westernized or the beginning of the westernized rule or influence of the world, you have to give credit to the Greeks and Romans. That was a game changer. Now, I will submit to you that the Roman Empire was not the creation of Europeans. However, it was the Roman Empire which the Europeans began to take rulership and power later and master influence on the world. So there's a Greek and Roman Empire that came along later. Now, the word Jew, in fact, comes from the word Yehudi. It's ultimately traced back to the Hebrew word Yehudi. So let's think about it. When the Romans and Greeks came into power, they didn't speak Hebrew. The spoken language of the Israelites during that time was the majority of the time. Later on, they did begin to speak Greek, but before then was Hebrew and Aramaic, which is very interesting. If you know anything about the history of the Israelite people, and I will later say the Jewish people, but right now for the sake of the discussion, to give you an idea, for the Israelite people in ancient times, the major languages that they spoke was Hebrew and Aramaic. And that's due to the influence of being in exile. Aramaic comes from the influence of the Babylonians. So let's do a little history. The term Jew is the English equivalent for Yehudi, which is Hebrew. Yehudi is anybody that at one particular time, in ancient time, anybody who came from the tribe of Yehudah, which is English Judah. Now, if you understand that, at that one particular time is the time before Israel went to exile. Before Israel went to exile, there were 12 tribes of Israel that were clearly identified by their tribal culture and identity. They lived in the land of Canaan, and when they lived in the land of Canaan, each tribe had their own territories. All of the tribes except for the elitist Levites were the Cohens, and the regular Levites were just the servants of all of Israel, They didn't have an inheritance. They didn't have a particular territory. They only dwelled amongst all the other 12 tribes. But the 12 tribes, the other 11 tribes that had their territories, if you may, they had their territories in the land of Canaan, and majority of them lived in the northern region of the land of Canaan. Now, the whole land was not united until King David took rule, and when King David took rule, it became the land of Canaan became the land of Israel proper. So, after David finished his ruling, or he retired, and then his son came along, then there was a disruption in the kingdom. The kingdom was no longer united. There was no more United States of Israel. It began to be a civil disruption. So there was a split. The northern kingdom decided to have their own king, and the southern regions decided to maintain the kingship under the lineage of Yehudah, because King David, or David Hamelech, was from the tribe of Yehudah. Whereas the northern kingdom, they didn't have a succession of kings that way. They went their own way. To make a long story short, the Assyrian Empire took power and ruled over much of the world during that time. And of course, the northern kingdom fell under the Assyrian Empire, and they were taken into captivity and they were exiled. The southern kingdom from the split was still under protection of Egypt during that time, and they were not, they were spared from the Assyrians' hands. Later on, the Babylonian took power, or the Babylonian Empire took hold and conquered the Assyrians. And then the southern kingdom, which is the kingdom of Yehudah, Benjamin, and Levi, Shimeon, these regions down in the southern were now under the influence and power of the Babylonians. And if you think about it, the northern kingdom that were taken to captivity by the Assyrians were now assimilated by the culture of the Assyrians, and then later on by the culture of the Babylonians. The Johnny come lately of the exile were the Yehudah Empire, the southern region of Yehudah, and those tribes that I told you, I just named before, that were under that umbrella, which was the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Shimeon, and of course you had some Levites, whatever. These were exiled, groups of them were exiled into Babylon, and they began to be the iconic nomenclature for all of the other Israelites that were in exile before them, that northern kingdom. And so the term Yehudi, coming from the tribe of Yehudah, began to be used by the powers that had influence over Israel, Babylonian Empire more so during that time, began to call anybody who were from Israel Yehudi. Now, all you have to do is check the scriptures of the Tanakh, and you'll find in the book of Esther, the book of Nehemiah, the book of Ezra, the book of Daniel, and these books like them, the book of Lamentations, these different books will show you and demonstrate how the term Yehudi began to evolve to a word meaning Israel. It began to be a semantic word for all of Israel. Now, afterwards, the Persians take over, and the Persian Empire began to allow the southern kingdom to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the cities, the temple more importantly. And that's the reason why when you read the book of Ezra and you read the book of Nehemiah, you'll see that Israel is returning under the umbrella name Yehudah. So many people aren't aware, at least this is what I observed. Many African American people, folk that subscribe to the idea that Jew is something that should be exclusively used for Ashkenazi, are ignorant of this part of history, or they totally ignore it. But let's go further. So the term evolved, all right, meaning other people besides the tribe of Yehudah. And this is talked about in not only in historical documents and records, for those of you who subscribe to what is called the New Testament of Bari Hadasha or whatever, you will see in that these books or these writings, these Greek writings, ascribe to anyone who come from any tribe of Israel as Yehudi. It names them as Jews. Okay, you see this in the book of Josephus or Josephus. And you will see this even written by other historians. So when the Greek and Roman Empire had its full waxing, all right, you will understand that they had to, in their vernacular, come up with a term that was equivalent to Yehudi. And so you see these terms that were developed. And then you have what is called the 5 romantic languages. What are these 5 romantic languages? Of course, the westernized society or westernized culture call these 5 languages romantic languages because it comes from them. It comes from the Greek and Latin language. Okay, or languages, I'm sorry. So here we go. Spanish is one of the 5 romantic languages. Portuguese is one of the 5. All right. French is one out of the 5. Let me just get my mind. Romanian, all right, is one of the 5. All right. And then the 5th one, you see Spanish, Portuguese, French, Romanian. Wow, I drew a blank, but it sure is in my description in the notes. But you'll see there were 5 romantic languages. So it'll come to me in a second. Italian, there we are. So these 5 languages that they call the 5 romantic languages, and they call it that because it says the words and because the structure and the way the languages flow, all right, they are loved, and they bring all kinds of intimate relationships because of the words, okay? But the reason why it was called the 5 romantic languages is because the Europeans named it that, all right? Western society named them. And then we know now when I say the granddaughters of Latin and Greek would be German, okay, and in English. And so if you look at all of these, the etymology of the word Yehudi, all the way down to the word in German, which is Juden, and you look at the English being a broken German language, which is a smorgasbord language of other languages inside of it, because English today, modern English, is still evolving. But if you look at Old English, when the terms like ye, thou, and when it's doest, all of these different terms that are not used in modern English, Old English also borrowed these terms from the Latin, Greek, and French for the word Yehudi. So I've heard people argue, the word Jew, Jew, did not exist back in the 17th century. It did not exist in the 16th and 15th century. It did not exist then. This is what I was talking about, the usage of facts and taking them out of context. Technically speaking, the word Jew, as found in modern English, did not exist. Okay? However, it did exist under a different spelling, which is IEW. But there were different variations of the word Jew that referred to Yehudi, or later on to anyone who comes from the tribes of Israel, of which the word Yehudi has evolved to. And so if you look at these words, you find that I was replaced by the J. There was no need for I anymore for the soft G sound in the modern English vernacular or the uses of spelling. So if you go back in the 1611 version and you look at different scriptures, all of the words that we find using J, at one point in time in the Old English, I was used. So when you see the spelling of Jew in the 1611 version, it is I-E-W. The word Jew existed. And guess what? It wasn't the European Jews that came up with the term Jew. It was Christian, Anglo-Saxon people. Jews had nothing to do with it. The first Jews that came into America, or when Jews began to speak English, they had to use words of accommodation. They could not speak Hebrew. It is like a Jew saying to someone in English, I'll see you on Yom Rishon, or Yom Sheni, or Yom Shlishi, or Yom Revi'i, or Hamishi, or Shishi, or, they wouldn't say that. They would have to say, I'll see you on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. These are terms we speak in English. And for many of you who run away from the term Jew, you speak English. Then stop speaking English. Don't say, don't call me a Jew, call me Yehudi. But if you understand the history of Israel, then you have to be included, if you consider yourself Israel, within the term Yehudi. Because all of Israel was called Yehudi. We see Mordechai, who was a Benjaminite. A Benjaminite, okay? A Benyamini, okay? Was called Yehudi. It is also spoke about this whole thing was spoken about in Masechta Megillah. In the Talmud Bavli, you'll see in Masechta Megillah, in 13a all the way to 13b, they talked about what is a Yehudi, all right? And they already acknowledged that a Yehudi included all of Israel, but they even took it a step further. A Yehudi is anybody who converts into what we call Judaism. Now, that's a segue to the term Judaism. The term Judaism, again, was not founded by Ashkenazi Jews. The European Jews had nothing to do with the term Judaism. Actually, the term Judaism is going back to about the 2nd century CE. The first time anyone sees the term Judaism used is in the Greek language, back in the book of Maccabees, the 2nd book of Maccabees to be exact. And I believe it's the 2nd chapter of the book of Maccabees in the 21st verse. If you realize that, you have to understand the word Judaism. Again, when we talk about etymologies, speaking English, all right, these words were born at a very early time from another language that influenced the development of the language most of us speak today, and that is English. So let's be real. Majority of you were raised in America, and you live in America. And the languages of America, there are 2 major languages in America, and that is Spanish and English. And we already acknowledged that Spanish is a language that was influenced by Latin and Greek, just like the other 4 Romantic languages. And you see that English, all right, is another language that has been influenced by Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Romania, okay? You just can't escape it. Since you were raised here in America, you speak English. Your first education that came from slavery was English. So to ignore or to disavow the word Jew because you are now waking up to the Hebrew language and you're learning some Hebrew terminology, you're saying you're not a Jew, I think it's ridiculous. And if anyone of you are familiar with the history of Israel, you just cannot deny being a Jew. It just doesn't make sense. Anyway, I hope this has helped many of you and clear up some of your confusion. I'm Rabbi Yehudah. If you have any more questions or comments, anything that you'd like for us to address, we'll do our best to address them. And like I said, our goal is to educate and to help quell confusion. So please follow us, hit the subscribe button and notification button below, and we'll do whatever we can to address your issues. Don't forget to support us. We have a publication, Siddur Chokmah Yisrael, which is our own Siddur that covers our Minhag. You could buy that Siddur on Lulu.com. So please support us. And with that, I bid you a shalom uvracha.